They called her Luz when they spoke kindly, but mostly they didn't. Mostly they said half-blood, or worse, something caught in the back of the throat like a burr or a bone. The ones who gave her that name were soldiers, settlers, the ragged border folk who stared too long at her skin and not long enough at her eyes. Her mother was a Chiricahua Apache, her father a Spanish ranch hand who fled before Luz had teeth. She was raised between camps, beneath desert moons and the hiss of yucca fires, too pale for the mescalero girls, too strange for the Mexican wives. She didn't belong anywhere. The only person who saw her was Taza, her grandfather on her mother's side. He taught her how to move without being heard, how to track deer by the shift of crushed grass, how to fight without hesitation. But even he, with his soft leather hands and the faint ghost of smoke always clinging to his hair, called her daughter of two ghosts when he drank too much mezcal. When he vanished on a raid and never came back, Luz was 13 and already harder than most grown men. At 16, she stood on the edge of the Sierra Madre cliffs, the wind knotting her hair, and watched smoke lift from a distant army outpost. The war had not ended, it only changed names. Apache bands raided north, cavalry came south, and the railroad split through the land like a knife. Luz worked odd jobs where she could. She gathered mesquite pods, tanned hides, sharpened blades for men who wouldn't look her in the face. She learned to speak 3 languages but was trusted in none of them. Then came the night Fort Summer caught fire. She saw it from a day's ride out, a glow like a second sun bleeding up into the stars. Luz had gone south to trade skins and hadn't meant to return so soon, but a bad feeling rode her shoulder like a buzzard. By the time she reached the edge of the fort, the flames were low and the bodies cold, soldiers dead in their beds, civilians shot in the back as they ran. Even the horses were gone. And the Apache were blamed. It didn't matter that Luz found tracks that told a different story. Didn't matter that the rifles used weren't models the Apache carried. The governor at Santa Fe declared the mescalero guilty, and a new wave of violence swept across the South. Settlements torched, children taken, camps scattered. Luz watched the land fold in on itself, old wounds ripped open by white men with ink and bullets. One night she found herself camped near a dry creek bed, trying to sleep with one hand on her knife. That was when she heard the boy. He came stumbling through the sagebrush, barefoot and bleeding. His wrists were bound with rawhide, his shirt torn at the shoulder. Luz waited, blade ready, until she saw the shape chasing him. A man, pale, thick-necked, with a club in one hand and a lantern in the other. Luz moved before she thought. 2 steps from silence, she was behind the man, one strike with her rock. His skull cracked like old wood. She didn't check if he lived. The boy stared at her with hollow eyes. 11, maybe. His cheek bore the brand of a trading company, an outlaw brand, the kind used on stolen children. Apache, or what was left of one. They didn't speak. She led him to her fire, gave him water. He didn't look at her once. At dawn, he tried to run. She caught him. Tied him with rope, not out of cruelty, but to keep him alive. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just lay there like a shadow, waiting. When he finally spoke, he gave her a name, Canny. Said his mother had died a week ago, burned inside a wagon cage. Said he'd been traded 4 times since. Luz didn't ask more. She thought of bringing him to a camp. Maybe the scattered mescalero remnants near the Guadalupe Mountains, but something cold in her chest said he wouldn't make it. The boy had lost his people. She knew that feeling too well, so she made a decision without knowing why. They would ride west. Away from Fort Summer, away from the spreading war, toward something older and more dangerous. She heard rumors of a hidden camp deep in the Mogollon Highlands, survivors, mostly women and old warriors, Apache who refused to surrender, a place where Canny might belong again, a place where Luz might finally understand what to do with the war inside her. But the journey would not be quiet. Within 2 days, they were hunted. First by bounty men, loose-jawed drunks looking to sell a half-breed savage for silver, then by a detachment of volunteer rangers, former Confederates turned Indian hunters. Luz killed 2 with a trap made from fishing line and sharpened stakes. She slit the throat of a third when he wandered too far from his horse. Blood did not bother her. It was lies that made her tremble. Each night Canny said nothing, but he watched her. And each day he rode closer to her side. They reached the edges of the highlands on the 12th day. The trees thickened. Pines rose in strange, crooked columns, and snow still clung to the north-facing slopes. The air turned bitter, clean in a way that scraped the lungs. Luz felt something old stir in her bones. Then they saw the smoke. Not campfire smoke, not warmth. This was black, dense, rising in bursts. Luz left Canny hidden in a ravine and crept forward. What she saw stole the breath from her chest. A massacre in progress. Bodies strewn like broken dolls, horses still screaming, arrows in their flanks, a cluster of figures in gray and black, not uniformed but armed. At least 15 men moving through the remnants of what had been a peaceful camp. Women shot while running. Children pulled from hiding places and struck down. Some of the attackers wore crosses. Some wore feathers not their own. She recognized one of them. A man with white hair braided down his back, a face like cracked leather. She had seen him once in Las Cruces, smiling while a slave auction took place behind him. Captain Orrin Tate, former Union scout turned mercenary, now leading raids under the name of Frontier Justice. He wasn't there for silver, he was there to erase. Luz went back for Canny, shaking. He looked at her face, then looked away. "We can't go there," she said. He didn't answer. That night they camped beneath an overhang of limestone. Luz lit no fire. She stared at her hands for hours. Canny finally broke the silence. "You kill him." "Not yet." "He killed my cousin," the boy said. "Had her braids, wore them on horse." Luz said nothing. She looked to the stars, the ones she remembered from childhood, the ones that didn't care about bloodlines or names. She would ride again at first light. But now it wasn't just to find a safe place for the boy. It was to finish something started long before she was born. Dawn broke cold and blue over the highlands, the sky bruised at the edges. Luz didn't speak when she saddled the mare. She moved with a silence that made Canny mimic her, wrapping his moccasins in cloth, buckling the leather sling of his stolen rifle tight across his chest. He didn't ask where they were going because he already knew. They weren't fleeing anymore, they were hunting. Tate and his men had moved northeast, toward the broken ridges that led to Canyon del Muerto. It was holy land, where the bones of ancestors lay in cliff dwellings above the wind. Apache and Navajo both honored it, which meant Tate would not. He would see it as shelter. A hiding place for whoever escaped the raid. Luz guessed he'd chase them into the canyon, finish what he started, and vanish before the army could claim credit. They rode light and fast, skipping water when they had to. On the third day they found signs, fresh dung, a strip of buckskin snagged on a mesquite branch, hoofprints leading to a narrow gorge. Luz crouched beside them and touched the dry indentations with her fingers. At least 6 riders and blood, not enough for the dead, just enough to say someone was running wounded. That night they reached the canyon mouth. A slit in the world, red walls rising like torn flesh from the desert floor. Wind screamed down its throat, no firelight, no voices. Canny crouched beside her. He looked thinner than he had a week ago, but his shoulders held steady. Luz saw the same look she, once seen in her own eyes, not fear, but a hunger for something to make sense. "We go in now?" he asked. She shook her head. "We wait." They did, wrapped in blankets of stillness. Coyotes barked far off. A hawk circled once, then vanished. Luz sharpened her blades by feel, letting the rasp of stone guide her thoughts. Just before dawn, movement stirred below. Torchlight flickering behind a bend in the rock. Not the whole group, scouts, 2 of them, checking the rim. Luz laid a hand on Canny's arm. He didn't flinch. She pointed once. He nodded. They split. She moved left, scrambling up a shale ledge, crawling through cactus and brush. The torchbearer came close, closer than he should have, younger than she expected. Maybe 19, with a scar under one eye and a necklace of teeth that didn't belong to him. His boots scraped rock, loud in the hush. Luz struck him from above, knife to throat, fast, clean. The second one spotted Canny. The boy didn't scream, he didn't run. He raised the rifle and fired once low. The shot broke the man's knee. The scream that followed echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Luz ran down, knife ready, but Canny had already finished it. The blood on his face wasn't his. They dragged the bodies into a crevice, buried them in dust. "They'll know soon," Luz said. Canny wiped his hands on his shirt. Good. The next day was smoke and sun. They moved deeper into the canyon, hiding their tracks. Tate's men had taken over a ruin near the far end, an old trading post built into a cave mouth. stones blackened by fire, old shelves warped with time. Luz scouted from above while Canny slept. She counted 10 alive, 2 wounded, 1 woman prisoner, barely upright, tied to a post and left in the sun. Luz saw bruises on her arms from this far up. No sign of Tate. But she heard him. His voice carried, calm and clean, as if he were a preacher and not a butcher. "She's not Apache," he said. "She's something else, worth more alive." Luz's stomach turned. She slid back from the rim and sat in the dust, eyes closed. The woman, whoever she was, would not last 2 more days. They needed help, more than 2 ghosts in the desert. That night, Luz lit a fire just long enough to send a signal. A flicker, low on the ridge, using the old code her grandfather taught her. She didn't know who might see it, but the old ones were watching. And sometimes, if you burned the right things, they answered. By morning, they weren't alone. Footprints near camp, bare feet, wide strides. Someone had passed within spitting distance and left a bundle by the saddle, smoked meat, 2 water gourds, and a single black feather. Canny stared at it like it was gold. "That's Nature's mark," he whispered. "He's alive." Nate, son of Cochise, last seen in chains, then gone. Some said he escaped. Some said he died and became wind. Luz smiled, small and bitter. "Then he's watching." They moved again that afternoon, preparing. Luz had mapped the terrain. She knew the trails Tate's men patrolled. They had rifles, yes, but they were lazy, sure of their victory, the kind of men who thought bullets were enough. They weren't. Luz taught Canny how to set tripwires using yucca cord, how to rig caltrops from bone, how to bait a path with sound and then strike from shadow. He learned fast, faster than she had. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice came from somewhere deep and cracked. "He called my sister a pet," Canny said one night. "Who?" "Tate said he'd feed her like a dog." Luz stared into the fire. "Then we end him." The assault came with thunder. Not real thunder, but the drumbeat of hooves. Nature's warriors rode in from the east, 6 in total, faces painted with ash and ochre. They came silent like ghosts made flesh. Luz didn't greet them. She didn't need to. They knew what she was. They surrounded the camp at dawn. Luz and Canny crept from the rear while the others made noise at the front. A feint. The enemy scrambled, shouting orders, firing blind. Inside the ruin, Tate stood in a dust storm of rage. "You think you can scare me," he bellowed. "I've gutted more Apache than you've seen." Luz stepped from the shadows, knife in one hand, flintlock in the other. Canny followed, holding a broken lance like it was holy. Tate turned to run. Luz shot him in the thigh. He went down hard, swore, crawled. She didn't speak as she walked to him, just pressed the knife to his throat and leaned close. He looked up, saw her face. "You," he gasped. "You're, what the hell are you?" Luz didn't answer. She turned to Canny. "Do you want it?" she asked. The boy nodded. He knelt beside the man who branded his cousin and wore her hair like a prize. And he made it slow. Afterward, no one said a word. The woman prisoner was freed, given water, held gently as she sobbed into Luz's shoulder. The ruin burned behind them, smoke rising like prayer. Nate found Luz before he left. His eyes were old, older than she expected. "You've got the blood," he said, "but more than that, you've got the fire." Luz said nothing. He touched her shoulder once, like a father, then vanished into the canyon. She and Canny rode west again, not toward safety. There was none. But now they rode with names behind them. Now they rode with purpose. By the time spring swelled the rivers with meltwater and filled the canyons with birdsong, Luz and Canny had crossed through 3 territories, left 5 corpses behind them, and slept more nights beneath stars than under roof. They never talked about Tate, not directly. His name was gone, like smoke cleared from a battlefield. But the things he did, the scars he left in others, lingered in the way they walked, in how Canny still flinched at the crack of dry wood, how Luz kept her knife within arm's reach even when she bathed. They rode south through the Mimbers Valley, where black rock jutted like the teeth of giants. There were whispers of cavalry columns assembling in the east, driving westward to clean up renegade tribes. That was the word now, renegade. Never mind that they were defending their own graves. They stopped in a place called Salt Draw, a settlement no bigger than a drunken thought. Shacks leaned together like conspirators, one store, two brothels, and a church that had never seen God. Luz wanted supplies, ammunition, salt, needles. They could have passed through, but Kenny spotted a horse tied to a rail and froze. It was his uncle. Apache markings on the saddle horn, a notch on the stirrup, the same horse he watched vanish the day his camp was taken. They moved slow after that, careful. Luz tied her braids back, dressed as a man. Canny walked like a shadow with teeth. The man they were looking for came out of the saloon just after sundown, broad-shouldered, greasy hat, and dragging a girl no older than 10 by the wrist. She was limp with fear. Luz crossed the street before thinking. Her pistol was up before the man even saw her. He laughed when he did. "What's this now? Little snake thinks she's got fangs." The girl tried to wriggle free. He slapped her hard enough to knock her sideways. Then Canny stepped from the alley and spoke for the first time that day. "Let her go, Colas." The man turned. His face went slack. "Boy." Canny didn't reply. He raised the rifle, and Luz saw his arms trembling. Not with fear, with the weight of it. Colas dropped the girl. She ran. Canny pulled the trigger. The shot hit Colas in the neck. He didn't fall right away. Just stood there, gurgling, blood pulsing from the wound like oil from a busted vein. When he dropped, it was like a tree falling, slow and loud. By nightfall, the town had turned against them. Luz knew the type, settlers who didn't care about justice, only about order. A dead man in the street was disorder, no matter what he'd done. She and Canny rode out before the noose could swing. 2 days later, deep in the Whetstone Hills, they found the girl again. She followed them, barefoot, face sunburnt raw. She didn't cry. Just stood there, arms crossed, like she'd already been told no 1,000 times and didn't expect yes. "My name's Mara," she said. "I ain't going back." Luz wanted to send her away. She almost did, but the girl had eyes like burned coal and a spine made of something harder than bone. Canny gave her half his blanket that night without saying why. 3 became their number. They headed southeast into Apache Pass, toward the mountain strongholds where Luz had once watched her mother sing to the moon. She remembered little of the language now, but the land still held her name like a buried note in a long song. They came across a hidden camp near Mount Graham, where survivors of the raids lived like ghosts, mostly women and old men, children with scars deeper than their skin. Luz spoke with an elder who called her Chai, Dagoti, one who walks between. "We heard of you," he said. "You burned Tate's nest." Luz nodded. She did not correct him. The elder touched her cheek gently. "You are not neither, you are both, and both is strong." They stayed 4 days. Mara learned how to snare rabbits. Canny trained with a spear. Luz helped rebuild part of the outer wall, but her hands ached from stillness. She wasn't meant to rest, not yet. On the 5th night, scouts returned with news. A new mercenary company had crossed into the basin. Not rangers, not army, bounty hunters mostly, veterans of the Indian Wars. Their leader was a man called Goss, a preacher once turned butcher. They carried flyers with sketches. One of them was Luz. Another was Canny. The camp voted to move by morning. Luz knew running would only delay it. Goss wouldn't stop. The flyers said wanted alive. That meant something darker than execution. So she did what the old Apache would not. She rode out alone. She found Goss's camp on the 3rd night, south of San Carlos, dozens of men, tents staked in a circle like teeth, fires bright enough to burn dreams. She watched from the rocks above, counting shadows, marking movements. Then she moved through them like wind. She slit 3 throats before they noticed, set fire to 2 wagons, shot the man on lookout in the face. By the time they scrambled for weapons, she was gone. Goss stood in the firelight, shirtless, face red with rage. His chest bore a tattoo of a cross made from bullets. He shouted into the dark. "You think you're saving them, you're damning them. God's already chosen." Luz didn't answer. She never fired a shot at him, not that night. She wanted him to remember her first. By the time she returned to the mountain camp, it was gone, moved farther east. But Mara waited at the old fire circle, alone, scared, holding a note carved into wood. "We'll find you, you gave us time." Luz rode back with her jaw tight. Canny returned 3 days later, alive but bloodied, with a fresh knife wound in his leg and the scalp of one of Goss's men tucked into his belt. They didn't talk about it, but something between them shifted that day. Not mother and son. Not even kin. Something older, something sharper. They were becoming what the land had forged them into. Predators of the just. And justice in that territory was just another kind of vengeance. Monsoon season swept over the desert like a curse unspoken, quick, brutal, and loud enough to drown ghosts. The sky split open with violet rage, and the ground drank lightning like an old thirst coming home. Luz rode through it, soaked to the bone, her rifle wrapped in oilskin, Mara asleep in the saddle behind her. They had crossed into Sonora under the cloak of storm, knowing Goss's men would hesitate at the border. He'd pushed his bounty north of the Rio Bavis, but not all the way. Not yet. Canny was already ahead, gone silent for 4 days. He followed a trail of traders who moved girls like cattle and guns like seeds. They were heading to a place called La Puerta de los Olvidados, the Gate of the Forgotten, where law ended and cruelty made camp. Luz had only heard of it from her mother once, in a whisper, like saying its name would call down ruin. It was where the last of the old ways had been betrayed, where treaties were broken not with ink but with screams. Luz felt the land tighten as they approached. Ravens gathered where there should have been none. Dogs would not bark. Horses refused the narrow pass. Even the storms gave that place a wide berth. They dismounted at the edge. Mara stood on a rock and stared through the mist. She was 12 now, taller than before, eyes sharper. Her braids hung to her chest, wrapped in beads of obsidian and pine. Luz had taught her how to trap, how to strike with a blade, how to lie in wait without breathing. But she hadn't taught her how to stop. "You think he's alive?" Mara asked. Luz watched the canyon mouth. "If he ain't, we make them pay all the same." They moved at dusk, keeping low. The trail wound down through sandstone teeth, past petroglyphs so old they looked like shadows in the rock. Luz saw horses below, corralled tight. Men in oilskin coats laughed around a fire. A cage stood at the center, too small, made of chain and bone. Canny was inside it. Alive. Barely. Face swollen, one eye shut, hands bound with iron. Mara gasped, but Luz caught her arm fast. They waited, counted. 11 men, maybe more. Goss was not among them, but his stain was there. These were his dogs, bounty trash, deserters, knife-eaters. They chained Canny like an animal and hung a placard on the cage, property of the Lord's reckoning. Luz moved first. She didn't wait for prayer. She crawled down the left flank, cut a sentry's throat with a knife she made from a broken spoon. Mara followed the opposite side, took out the drunk near the latrine, silent, precise, like Luz taught her. They struck at full dark. Luz threw fire oil onto the fire pit and lit it with a match wrapped in cedar bark. Flames exploded. Screams followed. Men ran toward the blaze. Mara opened the cage with a key she stole from a dead man's throat. Canny fell into her arms. "Can you walk?" she asked. He spat blood, "Long as I can kill." They fled into the ravine with bullets in their wake. Luz covered the rear, cutting down 2 pursuers with clean shots to the chest. Mara dragged Canny uphill through thornbrush and shale, hands bleeding. They didn't stop until the stars were over them again and the smell of smoke was far behind. They camped beneath a ledge. No fire, no words for a long time. Canny's ribs were cracked, his lips split wide, but he was alive. And Luz could see something new behind his pain, no longer just the boy who had survived, but the boy who had returned. Like iron pulled from the earth and finally sharpened. He spoke low, throat hoarse. "They're building a camp, South Ridge, holding women, girls." "How many?" Luz asked. "Dozens, maybe more." Goss was gathering. For what, they didn't yet know. But he was nesting in the mountains with more men, more guns, and a belief that God was on his side. The three of them rode east, looping back through the highlands. Luz lit signal fires on 3 peaks, a code older than bullets. Within days, the old ones came, not warriors, not armies, survivors, outcasts, widows, hunters with knives forged from wagon axles. One woman named Sanny carried a satchel of scalps taken over a lifetime. Another, quiet and pale, never spoke, but her arrows flew straight and never missed. They did not ask Luz for a plan. They asked for a target, and she gave them one. It was a hidden basin above the Bavisp, where Goss had dug into the cliffs, using old mining shafts as stockades. He called it New Jerusalem, a kingdom of flame and iron. Luz knew they couldn't take it like soldiers, it had to be taken like ghosts. So they became ghosts. They starved themselves to move quieter. They painted their faces with ash. They buried rifles in creeks and dug them up days later. They poisoned wells, set false trails, burned Goss's supply wagons while his men slept. At night, they howled like wolves to drive fear into the bones of sentries. And then they came. 1 week after the moon went black. They struck at dusk. Kenny went first, limping still but heart strong. He snuck into the lower pen with a knife carved from elk horn, slit the throats of 2 guards, unlocked the pens. The women inside did not scream. They rose. Sanny led them, blades in hand. Luz took the west ridge, shot the signal flare. The basin lit up. Fire from all sides, chaos. Goss appeared at the chapel door like a prophet bleeding gold. He carried a rifle etched with scripture. His hair was tied back, and his coat bore buttons made from bone. "You think this ends me," he roared. "I am the end." Luz faced him at the altar steps. "You're not the end," she said. "You're what ends." He raised the rifle. Myra shot him first. 1 shot through the mouth. He dropped like a stone. Silence fell, the kind that comes only after blood. The survivors burned the camp themselves. No spoils, no prisoners, just ashes and names carved into the cliff. By dawn, nothing remained but smoke. Luz sat on the ridge watching the sunrise. Her hands were blistered, her legs cut to hell, but she was whole. Canny leaned against her shoulder. Mara stood on the cliff edge, hair lifting in the wind. She had not cried. "Is it over?" she asked. Luz looked at her, at Canny, at the scars on all of them. "No," she said, "but now they know what we are." And what they were was not forgotten. Not half, not lost. They were fire. The wind shifted with the seasons, and with it came silence. Not peace, never peace, but a hush that fell over the southern territories like a breath held too long. Word of what happened at New Jerusalem traveled without mouths. Traders found their wagons burned. Bounty hunters rode north and never returned. The name Goss, once feared, became a question muttered in bars, followed by stories too strange to be lies. They said the half-blood girl rode with the dead, that her knives never dulled, and her shadow cursed any man who chased her. Some said she wore war paint made from ash and coyote blood. Others whispered she wasn't one woman, but many faces behind one fury. None of them knew her name. But her name was Luz. And she was still riding. She had no camp, no home. She moved from ridge to basin, always watching. Her body carried scars that no medicine could smooth, but she did not limp. Her eyes were sharper than flint. She didn't talk much anymore, only when the words mattered. Kenny rode with her again, healed in body, colder in spirit. He carried his grandfather's lance now. The old ways weren't dead in him, they had simply gone quiet, like coals waiting for breath. He spoke little, but when he did, others listened. Myra was no longer a child. She rode her own horse now, fast and black and mean. She wore a bandolier across her chest and a knife she'd taken from Goss's belt strapped to her thigh. She, grown into something fierce and sure, but Luz saw the pain in her still, behind the steel. It sat beneath her silence like a trap never sprung. They were 3, always 3. Not blood, not kin, but bound. Somewhere north, the army still hunted tribes like rabbits. The mescalero had been scattered again, pushed to barren lands that gave nothing. Treaties were signed with wet hands and broken before the ink dried. Luz passed through their lands once, quietly, left medicine and meat near their fires, said nothing, took nothing. She didn't belong to them. She belonged to no one. Until the girl came. Her name was Tsila, and she came limping into their camp one night near the Chiricahua border, barefoot, hair matted with dirt and blood. She escaped from a cattle baron's ranch near the Huchuca Hills, one of the last strongholds where girls were still bought like mule stock and kept for men with more gold than spine. Tsila was barely 13. She carried her own teeth in a pouch around her neck. Luz held her that night while she shook. Tsila didn't speak for 3 days. When she finally did, her voice was splintered. He said I wasn't human, said I was wild, that no one would come. Luz looked her dead in the eye. We came. They rode that same night. No plan, no prayer, just rage. The ranch was built like a fortress, walls of stone and iron, but the men inside had grown fat on fear. They hadn't tasted war. They didn't know what it meant to face something sharpened by loss. Mara led the charge. She crept over the roof and poured fire oil down the chimney. When it lit, the whole damn house screamed. Canny opened the pens, drove the horses wild, turned the place into chaos. Luz walked through the gate like death with a heartbeat, shot the Baron through his spine as he ran, didn't speak a word. By dawn, the place was ash. Tsila stood in the ruins, knife in hand, and smiled for the first time. They did not keep her. They taught her. Left her with women who'd risen from the same fire, who knew how to carve strength from memory. Luz gave her a pistol. Canny gave her a name to remember. Mara gave her a braid. After that, it was clear. They weren't riding to survive anymore. They were riding to be seen. It wasn't vengeance now, not entirely. It was something wider, slower, like water carving canyons into stone. Everywhere they passed, they left behind change, the kind that didn't fade. A rancher's child taught how to hunt without killing for sport. A settler's widow given her land back after driving out hired guns. A Navajo boy saved from a trader's wagon, armed and trained before they moved on. They were whispered about, feared, and prayed to in the same breath. Some called Luz the Black Wind. Some called her the Daughter of Smoke. But she was still just Luz, a half-blood nobody who'd seen too much and stayed standing. The last battle came without warning. Not planned. They rode into a town called Dry Fork to resupply, dusty, near empty, but not dead. Luz felt it before she saw it, the stillness, the eyes that wouldn't meet hers, and then the posters. New ones. Fresh ink. Not gauze this time. Army orders. Arrest on sight, dangerous insurgents, responsible for the destruction of multiple settlements. Bounty, $10,000, dead or alive. Their faces drawn sharp and clear. Luz, Canny, Mara. They didn't run. They didn't speak. They rode to the edge of town, made camp near a dry arroyo, waited. The soldiers came at midnight. Not many, just enough to believe they'd win. The fight was brief. Luz took 2 with her rifle before the third got close. She wrestled him into the mud and crushed his windpipe with a rock. Canny stabbed another through the heart as he tried to reload. Mara caught the last with a trip line, then stood over him with her pistol. He was young. Eyes wide, barely more than a boy. I didn't want this, he whispered. Mara stared, then lowered the gun. You got it anyway, she said, and walked away. By morning, there were 6 bodies buried in the wash. No more came. That was the last time they were hunted. The government turned to other wars. The desert kept its secrets. Years passed like wind through canyon grass. Canny returned to the mountains, built a small home of stone and cedar, taught others what he had learned, how to survive, how to fight, how to forgive when it didn't cost too much. Mara rode north, alone, left behind her knife but took her fire. She'd speak at gatherings, not with stories but with silence. She'd sit by the flame and let others speak, and in that space girls became something else. And Luz. She rode. Sometimes with others, often alone. She became a myth stitched into the skin of the land. Not out of pride, but because someone had to. They never found her bones. They never hung her name in a church. But long after, when the children of those she'd saved grew old and told tales by firelight, they spoke of a woman with eyes like dusk, hands like carved stone, and a voice that could still mountains. She was no one, they'd say. She was nothing. Then pause. But she saved us. And that more than blood, more than name, more than revenge. That was legacy.